and I am thrilled that you are joining us today for this conversation around artificial intelligence and education. I'm actually dialing in from Fordham Prep in the Bronx. I'm here all day working with some teachers on a growth and development program, and I can't tell you how many questions they've asked throughout the day about the ways in which not just ChatGPT, but all sorts of educational technology that integrates with artificial intelligence will change the way that they're doing their work. So this is an incredibly timely conversation. And I could not be happier to have Jennifer Carolan joining us. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to take a step back and just set some context for why we are hosting a conversation like this. Those of you who are members of the Middle States Association know that this is our year of the Middle States Network. We declared early in the fall that we wanted to create opportunities for members to connect not only with one another, but with subject matter experts who can help you all do your jobs better, because our mission, our shared purpose, is to ensure a high quality education for every child around the world. And we started in October with a great conversation with Michael Horn. We talked about his book, From Reopen to Reinvent, which in my estimation is the best book out there on facilitating change in schools. And I am thrilled today to have Jennifer Carolan be our second guest. I want to tell you a little bit about Jennifer because she has such a, maybe not exactly unique, but an extremely distinctive background. So Jennifer taught in traditional public schools for 7 years. And then she earned a master's degree in education from Stanford University, after which she went on to learn the craft of venture capital and spent about a decade doing that before she co-founded Reach Capital, which invests primarily in ed tech. They invest at every stage of ed tech: early childhood education, K-12 education, higher education, and even workforce development. And that's actually relevant even to one of the questions that came in early from those of you who registered. So I'm excited to get around to the Q&A part of our talk today. But beyond the fact that Jennifer brings this highly distinctive perspective of having been both a classroom teacher and an investor in educational technology, the thing that most resonated for me about Jennifer and her background is her mission alignment with Middle States and with you all. And I just want to read to you something that she said about herself, which is on the Reach Capital website. She has said that learning allowed me to step outside of my life and consider new ways of thinking. It helped me understand and develop empathy for others, for their lives and their hardships. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us. I'm thrilled to have this conversation.
Thank you so much, Christian. I'm honored to be invited and just really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. So I'm going to ask you a question in just a moment, but before we do that, for the sake of the audience, I want to just create some common ground and some common language. And we may end up using these words somewhat interchangeably, but for the sake of the audience, there are 3 terms that I thought would be helpful to define up front. The first is artificial intelligence, which we're going to talk about as a computer system that performs tasks in the same way that we would normally require human intelligence to do. Things like recognizing speech or understanding natural language, making decisions. That's a kind of a high-level concept. A large language model would be a specific kind of artificial intelligence that gets trained on a huge amount of data, text data, and can in turn generate human-like text. And we can use large language models for things like translating foreign languages, for example, or summarizing texts. And ChatGPT, which is all the rage and certainly covered heavily in news and in social media, is a very specific form of a large language model, right? It's the form that was created by OpenAI. It's certainly not the only LLM out there. So just 3 terms that I want everybody to be familiar with. And Jennifer, for our conversation, there are really 2 themes. The first theme is this an incremental change that we're seeing with ChatGPT and other similar technologies? Or is this a step change? Have we reached kind of like a new evolutionary plateau or even slope with these technologies? And then the second theme is really, for the sake of our members, what are they going to need to do? How might they respond to this moment? But let's just start with your reaction. What did you think when ChatGPT came out?
Sure. If you don't mind, can I share just a little bit of context too around, okay, so I always feel that when I'm speaking to educators, which are my favorite people really, is that I need to explain a little bit how I ended up in this role of venture capitalist and at the intersection of technology and investment. So I grew up in Chicago. I spent some of my upbringing in the suburbs and some in the city. I attended Whitney Young High School, Chicago Public School, where Michelle Obama went, our most famous alum. And I had this really unique experience of having two completely different schooling approaches and environments. And that really put me on a path. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a very formative experience for me and put me on a path of thinking about how technology could improve equity in education. So that's always been a driving force behind my investing and my career, really. So I, 22 years ago, moved out to Silicon Valley, and it was there I joined New Schools Venture Fund, and then I founded Reach Capital with some of my friends from New Schools and some others. And we have been investing in education technology now for about 15 years and have invested in about 140 companies. So some of them you may know: Newsela, Class Dojo, Mainstay, TeachFX, and Nearpod are some of them. But really, I came at this from an angle of accessibility and equity. So just on the your question on is this a step function change? Is this incremental? So AI has been around for decades. We've been investing in AI tools, companies like Gradescope and Mainstay and chatbots, and the way that we've seen how AI can predict how much time it takes to arrive at your location in your car, things like that. So it's kind of creeped into our lives in all different ways. Siri is a great example of a natural language processing AI tool, and it has creeped into education. But generative AI, I think, really represents a step function change in tools, and certainly the fact that it has spread so quickly. Like it spread within 5 weeks of its release on November 22nd. It was banned by the New York City Department of Education. So just the velocity at which this tool has spread speaks to how impactful it is and how different it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to come back around to that question of not just New York City Department of Education, but other schools and districts banning the technology as well, and get your thoughts on that. But before we do that, two of your colleagues, or at least one current and maybe one former colleague, wrote what I consider to be a really tremendous analysis and reflection called "Barbie Was the First Avatar."
Yeah.
And as someone who spent many years in the classroom, and who cares deeply about the development and the formation of young people, I was struck by this article, and I want to read just a snippet of it, because it gets at the intersection of generative AI, as you just said, as a kind of a step function change, and the work that we do as educators, not just to shape the minds, but really the character, the social emotional development. And the two authors, Maria Salamanca and Jamira Herrera, had this to say about identity formation. So identity is easier to explore than ever before, but the challenge with online identity reconstruction is that if adolescents fail to create coherence between their online self and their offline selves, they're going to suffer more negative psychological outcomes, correlating with anxiety, depression, stress, and indeed players who create game characters that are inconsistent with their real identities are likely to feel lonely. And the ability to experiment with different identities will only accelerate with the rise of generative AI, because generating content and assets is easier than it's ever been. So when you think about, especially as a former classroom teacher, but also as a mom and an investor, when you think about the role of generative AI and educational technology and the work we do in classroom with the kids, how do you think about this problem of identity?
Yeah, it is an excellent piece by Jamira and Maria Salamanca. They're good friends. They're both first gen college students. They're graduates, and Maria's on a public school board in Florida, where she went to high school. I think it's it integrates really nicely child development research. So what we know about the adolescent brain is that it's forming its identity during these critical years. And the more the teen, the child can be authentic in the real world, the lesser the chance of mental health challenges and depression and anxiety and those sorts of things. So what's happening now is that kids are spending an enormous amount of time online. This is not news, I'm sure, to anyone on this webinar. And they're spending it in these metaverses, these online worlds, where their identity can be, an animal, it can be a fish, it can be, as she describes, it can be somebody, if you're a man, it can be a woman. And so that's creating, the concern is that it's creating some dissonance and confusion that's making it challenging to actually form identity during these critical years. So I think it's early days. We don't really know the full implications of some of these behaviors, which are new. Just the amount of time that kids are spending online and not in real life has just changed dramatically over the last decade. So on average, since 2012, there's this big seminal study on this published in Science that kids are spending 11 fewer hours per week with each other. So they're spending that time alone. So the amount of alone time has dramatically increased. The amount of time with friends has dramatically decreased. And yeah, we're just sort of learning the implications of that.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I especially felt this after reading Maria and Jamira's piece, that to the extent that this is an opportunity, generative AI may create space for teachers to invite students to use those tools to find and express their authentic selves.
Yeah.
Certainly to do a certain amount of exploring, but then ultimately to make some choices and maybe to be able to express themselves authentically in ways they haven't been doing before. But I think you put your finger on that word authentic, and that's critical.
Yeah.
It intersects with this other trend that you noted about young people spending less time in real life with their peers, and so the classroom becomes an even more special space when that classroom is in physical presence.
Yes,
for sure.
exactly. Danny asked a really good question here. Can it be a positive if kids, for whatever reason, have to suppress their identities in public and real life? Absolutely. I think she writes about that in the piece. There is, with many of these things, it's neither like all negative or all positive. There's nuances here. And I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. And in a follow-up email about today's webinar, I'll remind you all of that piece. But again, the title is Barbie Was the First Avatar, which is kind of an unforgettable title. So another question around whether this is an incremental change or a step change has to do with what many schools think of as a profile of a graduate. What does it mean for a student to successfully graduate from an educational program? And I guess my question for you, Jennifer, is does AI, and maybe particularly generative AI, really change how we need to think about what it means to successfully graduate from an educational program?
Do you mean like what skills would be needed, or?
Yeah, I'm thinking both in terms of skills and maybe habits of mind or dispositions of work.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I think this is an area that is a really interesting debate right now, is how should these tools be used? Are they cheat tools? Should they be banned? Are they important tools for going forward? And I guess I fall in the camp right now that this is not going away. Generative AI is just going to get better and better, and these tools are going to become more important, and they will be integrated into the workflow, just as the way technology has throughout time. And so my own personal opinion on this is that the schools that have acted quickly to ban it, I think that I understand why. All of a sudden, kids, including my own, I have a son, I have 3 kids, and my son is definitely using ChatGPT to turn in homework assignments. And I know when he applied to college, his essays were heavily written by ChatGPT. that's a whole nother topic of parenting, and we can talk about that later, but banning, so they're going to be nearly impossible you can't restrict kids from using them outside of school. So the question is, should they be allowed to use them inside of school? So not just New York City, many schools are now banning ChatGPT on the school networks and devices. And I guess like where I have questions, and I actually would love to hear how thoughts of folks that are here that are, doing this day in and day out. But, when previous technologies have been banned, and New York City in particular has often been quick to ban technologies. They banned Google Images, they banned Zoom, they banned Replit, they've banned a lot of different tech, and then they've reversed it. Cell phones, they were one of the first to ban cell phones too. And I feel that, and then they've enforced it in the schools that were that had the highest percentage of low income kids. So like these affluent schools, kids were still bringing their cell phones, they were still using these different tools, and then it was like tightly enforced in low income schools. And that's where I feel that it becomes an equity issue, because these are tools that are going to be used in the workplace. They already are being used in the workplace. There's many companies now that are being created around these tools, that they're using it for marketing and for voice analytics and for lots of different applications in the workforce. And so our kids are going to need to know how to use these tools responsibly. And I guess that's where I feel this is super challenging to do. And schools are now really, actually, I have a slide on this. If you don't, can I share my
Yeah.
screen? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to show you, I have this, I can pull this up here. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
I have some examples of AI that we can go into, but I was going to show you just some of the way that these tools are being used. So a lot of, I would say majority of the big schools are banning the use of ChatGPT, and they're saying until further review. So I think they're hitting pause and trying to figure out how to deal with it first. And then there are some teachers and some schools that are creating AI policies. And this is one that I thought was particularly interesting, about how it can be used in the class, how it can be used by teachers. And that is another approach, is like that they're coming together in these teacher committees or at the administrative level and creating policies around them. One other thing on this topic that I just wanted to show, this was an interesting post from Stanford, just published a few days ago, on how ChatGPT was being used by students. So this was in the Stanford Daily, was used in the fall quarter finals. And this is, and just anecdotally with my son too, that I'm seeing my own kids, that they're using it to solve this kind of cold start problem, where they're getting some ideas, brainstorming, outlining, and then they're sort of heavily editing the ChatGPT content, and then turning it in. Although you can see still that there's like 5% are just submitting full on AI generated content without edits.
Yeah. So as you're talking, Jennifer, I want to encourage folks to continue to use the chat section. It's really great to see you all engaging with respectfully these very difficult and really kind of gray zone questions. Jennifer, like you, I have a son. He's in high school. He's a freshman in high school. His school has banned ChatGPT, but at home, I encourage him to play around with it. And literally last night, he was preparing for a science test in which there was a sort of very math-heavy questions that he's going to have to answer today. And he had run out of sample questions to go through. And he asked me, well, should I just redo the questions that I've already answered? And I said, no, that's not going to help you internalize the problem solving method. So just go to ChatGPT, put in one of the questions that you did, and ask it to give you 10 new versions of that kind of question. So there can be great use cases for it. And obviously if
Yes.
students are going to just simply copy and paste, that's not a particularly helpful learning experience. But the previous slide that you were on really evokes for me one of the core issues that I'm seeing kind of come up indirectly in the chat section, which is the question of policy. So for folks who are in the audience, I would strongly recommend that you start following Ethan Mollick. He's a professor of entrepreneurship at Penn.
Yes.
He's in graduate school, and he's written just some tremendously practical things.
Yeah.
He has shared his course outlines in which he has his policy written there. And if I could recommend anything to the school leaders, the principals, the superintendents, the heads of school who are on the call right now, it is to activate a committee to formulate a policy around not just ChatGPT, but any form of kind of artificial intelligence aided work in the classroom. It reminds me of one of my favorite mental models from Stuart Brand, the PACE layer model. Like, we really need a governance layer at the core
Yes.
of all of this. I think of policy as kind of like a governance layer for this work, because anything that we do in the classroom is going to be built on top of that. And so if the governance layer isn't really stable, it's going to really jeopardize the integrity of the rest of the things that come after it. Another thing I'm seeing in the chat, and Jennifer, you put your finger on this as well when you said, like, the horses are out of the stable. Like, we can't put ChatGPT and other things back into the stable, or put the genie back in the bottle. And Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired and the author of many incredible books, has said that our ability to create new technologies outpaces our ability to civilize these technologies, and that is a real tension. And I worry about schools that are sitting on the sidelines and waiting to see what happens before they at least formulate policies and have some safe sandbox spaces for minimally teachers, if not teachers and students, to experiment with these things.
Absolutely. Yep. Christian, just to mention too, that now we're getting Turnitin, you're probably familiar with that company. It has a new AI writing detection tool that's coming on the market very soon. There's a bunch of startups in the space, Detect AI, that are working on AI detection too.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be those tools that will be prevalent on the market, I think, in the next few weeks, if not months.
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the worries and some of the dangers, and in the chat, then we may see other questions around this pop up. But for a moment, I want to pivot again back to questions of opportunity. And your partner, one of your partners, Tony Wan, who I think is the head of platform maybe for Reach, wrote a great piece back in December about GPT. So not just Chat GPT, but I guess many forms of generative pre-trained models, and a new generation of AI and ed tech. And one of the things he talks about is that little kids can now use technologies that are generative AI to create stories and to illustrate stories and to share stories with one another. And when I think, again, as a former classroom teacher, and I think about Bloom's taxonomy and trying to get kids to the top of that Bloom's pyramid, where they're not just analyzing and synthesizing their learning, but they're actually applying their learning and creating new things with their learning. That seems like a tremendously positive use case for generative AI. And I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about that.
Yeah, so we've been talking mostly about the student side so far. There's a lot of teacher Chat GPT tools here and are being developed right now. And those are some of the most exciting places that I see, not just Chat GPT, but AI in general that is coming into education or already here that's quite exciting. So some of the examples, I'll see if I just tried to grab some screenshots. Well, everyone's probably familiar with the chatbots. So like the nudges, the chatbots, that leverage natural language processing models and that are nudging students, reminding them to turn in their homework or to turn in their FAFSA form. So those have been on the market for a few years, and those are interesting. This is one called Mainstay, based in Boston, that works on retention for college students. There's also TeachFX, which is in our portfolio we incubated, and that one does voice analytics. So it records the classroom dialogue, and it gives teachers feedback on, what was their wait time like? What order questions did they ask? Did they ask mostly kind of volleyball type questions, or kind of deeper questions that required longer answers, deeper thinking? And they report out on kind of equity issues, gender, and things like that I think is pretty interesting. Another tool, this one is really interesting. I just learned about this one. I love this product. So this is a nonprofit, and it's based in San Francisco, I believe. The main company is called Ought, but this is a tool called Elicit, and it's for academic research. And so this is one I just did. I just threw in a question. This is a generative AI tool. So Chat GPT is not the only generative AI tool. There's many being developed or already out there. This is, what is the impact of phonics on reading instruction? And so it trolls the academic research. It summarizes it. It's like a lit review, and it will point you to the sort of most cited articles, give you an abstract, summary, intervention. I think this is going to save PhD students like a ton of time in their lit review, but also I think could be really interesting for teachers and educators and administrators to access the latest in academic education research. Somebody asked, where does the program draw their information? They draw it from the journal databases that are currently open right now. So that would be like ERIC, JSTOR, Google Scholar. I don't think that they have yet tapped into the paid peer researched databases yet, but I think that that would be interesting when they do.
Yeah.
And then this one is so interesting. This is another one. I don't know if you've seen this one, Christian. This is,
yes, I just saw this
too. This is crazy. Like when this comes out, it's NVIDIA's new Maxine eye contact product, and what it does is one of the reasons why Zoom is so fatiguing is because you're never making eye contact with the person, right? Your body language is limited, and you're not really having that eye. So this is kind of trains it. What it does is it kind of trains the eyes to be in eye contact, like the constant eye contact. I don't know much about this technology. I've just been kind of quickly reading about it, but I think this is super interesting too.
Yeah.
And then one other one worth mentioning. Well, we didn't talk about the dark side too much, but like there's some of the generative AI is that have come out, like Meta's Galactica, which was only, I think, released for 3 days before it was shut down or taken offline, not shut down. But what is dangerous about these generative AI products, or can be dangerous, I should say, is that they are so convincing sounding. Like they have just mastered that kind of conversational language, and they can churn out BS that sounds really good. And that's it's like the almost most dangerous type of people that like talk very authoritatively, and yet they're not. It's not based in real factual knowledge or research. So Galactica's product was kind of similar to Elicit's, but it ended up going offline after the researchers just felt it was just dangerous because it was churning out all this nonsense on scientific issues.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing, and then I think we'll turn to questions from the audience. We got a few ahead of today, and then there's been a bunch more that have been put into the chat, which we can get filtered for us by from some folks from Middle States. But Ethan Mollick, the professor from Wharton that I mentioned earlier, wrote early on about one of the opportunities with ChatGPT is to have it write things and then actually give students the opportunity to critique what ChatGPT has come up with, because it is so good at generating authoritative sounding, but sometimes factually incorrect material. In fact, one of the exercises he ran was having ChatGPT compose tweets by himself. And it cited these papers that he hadn't actually written, but sounded exactly like things that he could have written. And he said he actually had to go and check to see, like, did I write something that sounded like that? Is it sort of playing on words that I've already used, or is it just creating it out of whole cloth? But an opportunity is to this gets back to the question about, sort of next generation portraits of a graduate. Will we need to train explicitly for students to be able to spot falsehoods, spot misinformation, to correct misinformation?
Yes. I know, like, Sam Weinberg has done a lot of research on that at Stanford and many others, but I think that is going to be so important. Like, one of the researchers that I don't know if he's a researcher, Yuval Harari, who wrote Sapiens and 21 Lessons for the 21st Centuries. I think he has a chapter on education in that book that I think is so provocative and interesting in a lot of ways. But what he says is, like, we need to teach kids, like, who they are and how these algorithms work, so that they don't let the algorithms tell them who they are. And the algorithms will tell us what music we like, what kind of content we like, and kind of keep us in these little echo chambers. And we need to make sure that kids understand how powerful these algorithms are and how they work and how they're, we need to kind of get ahead of them.
Yeah, one more reading recommendation. I think everybody's going to walk away with a lot of reading recommendations, but on a similar theme, but a little more kind of nuts and bolts. Harari is more of a philosopher and historian. Kathy O'Neill wrote Weapons of Math Destruction, and it talks about the kind of the invisible, pervasive nature of algorithms. So that might be helpful for folks as well. Jennifer, one of the interesting things about the Middle States Commissions on Elementary and Secondary Schools is that we actually serve kind of three big categories of schools. We do have the elementary schools, we do have secondary schools, but we have a third category of what we call post-secondary but non-degree granting schools. And that's in addition to learning service providers who may not be quote unquote schools, but more like tutoring centers or enrichment programs. But we actually have a number of schools who are members who are serving students after high school, but who are not enrolled in a community college or a four-year degree grant institution. And these tend to be, things like, learn to be a medical technician or learn to go to a coding boot camp, right? And so we'll do accreditation for those kinds of post-secondary non-degree granting institutions. And someone who's a member of Middle States asked this question, which I think is really interesting for students in this space. He asks, could AI possibly make predictions regarding future, whether it's short or long-term hiring needs? So needed skills, preferred credentials, in at-risk and under-resourced locations to basically match, the folks who are in these kinds of programs with the employers. And at a time of very low unemployment, maybe this question is more urgent than ever. But just to repeat, Jennifer, can you picture AI being able to predict, again, in the short term or the long term, hiring needs, how to match the skills and the preferred credentials out there in the marketplace with people who are actually searching?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be surprised if it's not already happening. So that would be, to me, like a data, pretty much like a data issue, what data is available. And I particularly like the Harvard's Opportunity, I think it's called Opportunity Insights Center. And they have pulled together massive amounts of data at the zip code level to understand the opportunities and job demand and supply. And I don't know, I would assume that they're using machine learning to be able to predict what the demand is for, like, phlebotomists in, I don't know, Springfield, Illinois, or something like that. Like that definitely seems like it either that it's already available or not. But I would first start with the Opportunity Insights group.
Yeah. We have another question. This was submitted by a teacher of English at the American School of Marrakesh. This person asks, to what extent do you think that AI is a tool that will encourage people to think differently? And maybe the flip side, she asks, is whether there's a danger it'll encourage people to stop thinking for themselves.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm not sure I can answer that at this juncture. It's hard to say. I mean, I've already seen how some AI assisted technologies have already caused us not to think. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I use my map navigation tool like to a fault, where sometimes I'm like miles from my home. I'm like, where am I? Because the tool is not, I'm so dependent on it. Which is sad. Like I've sort of turned off my brain for certain functions that technology is already assisting me with. But at the same time, is that going to allow? I don't know if that's going to allow me to think in other different ways, or to think in new ways that are more creative. I'm not sure. It's a tough question. I think it's really a really interesting one. I would think that the calculator poses a really good analog there. Like, those that have grown up with the calculator and have used it heavily, like, have they forgotten to do basic math, and how has that hurt them for more advanced math further on? But what we can be sure of is that it will continue, and more jobs will be automated, and more content and certain types of skills will be automated, for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please finish your thought, because I want to
I was
ask
just
a more
going to say that,
question.
like, Yuval also talks about this a lot, and talks about, like, what are going to be the last like bastions of humanity to not, what is AI not going to be able to touch? And he talks about nursing and human care and things that require the emotional side of our humanity. Like AI is not touching that, and will it someday? I don't know, but those are the types of the caregivers, the care workers, and teachers are highly skilled, technical, but part of their job is care, and is emotional, and is connecting with students. And so that's why I'm not of the camp that we're going to have AIs teaching our kids. Like, it's not just about depositing content into our kids' brains. It's about inspiring them and taking the signals from them and being able to respond appropriately, and all of that other stuff.
Yeah. Someone wrote recently that there may be a lot of people who want to use Chat GPT to produce writing, but there are not a lot of people who want to read what Chat GPT has produced as writing. And I think you're saying something similar, right? There may be a lot of people who want AI to teach kids, but there probably aren't a lot of kids who want to be taught by an AI.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have read any of the AI generated kids books, and I know it's early, and they will get better, but they are so boring to me. They're like platitudes, and they're I just feel they're nothing like the incredible children's books that we all know and love. Maybe they'll get there, but right now people are on Twitter sharing all this. Oh, look, isn't it great that AI can produce these books? And I read them. Well, that's not beautiful children's literature.
Yeah. So a more specific version of this question about whether AI will enable us to think differently, I think actually relates to the work of the people on the call, which is much more specific to educational practices. So another reference for you all out there would be Philippa Hardman. She works mostly in higher ed in England. And she's absolutely someone I would encourage you to follow on LinkedIn. She's written a lot about, again, applications for Chat GPT in particular, but something she wrote more generally was that new technologies in general, and I'm quoting her now, usually ignore what we know about how human learns. And so they tend to reproduce broken systems of teaching and learning. And I worry that if we don't think too carefully about why we're assessing the way we assess, why
Yeah.
we're choosing the curriculum that we're choosing. And we simply use, for example, ChatGPT to accelerate the speed at which we can assess and accelerate the speed at which we
Yes.
can produce curriculum. We might end up reproducing a problem that's already here.
It's a great point. Yep. Yep. Totally.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. This feels very relevant to this audience. Someone asked what essential question you would personally ask school leaders to explore that assumes that generative AI is now just a permanent baseline. It's going to be inside all school communities. Obviously, students live outside of campuses will have access to it. So what would you want school leaders to deeply explore if that's the new reality?
I would want them to, in the case of writing in particular, and there's lots of different ways that AI is ChatGPT and generative AI is coming into schools. But in the case of ChatGPT, I would want them to really think about the end goals of writing instruction. Like what is it that you want your kids to walk away with when they leave your classroom at the end of the year? And to think about what ChatGPT automates, and therefore, how do you think about your time allocation for getting at your goals? Because like if one of your goals is to have your students develop authentic voice, ChatGPT is not going to do that. And so then how can you kind of use this tool to then to improve the progress towards what goals you have for your students?
So it sounds like you're almost suggesting kind of first principles thinking. What is really the purpose of the of the
Absolutely.
learning?
Absolutely. Yeah.
One other question for you around school leaders. How would you encourage them to think about the questions of equity? You brought that up at the beginning. We talked a little bit about it in relationship to banning and what that does to under-resourced and marginalized communities when those who have access to things like ChatGPT might be able to race ahead. Any thoughts on questions that school leaders should consider when it comes to issues of equity?
Yeah, I do. This is one of the areas I'm most concerned about and most thinking about, more deeply, because I know, being in the workforce and seeing that in the business world, I'm seeing that some of the employees, workers that are able to move quickly and succeed in their jobs are facile at the use of technology tools. Like any given business is going to use, I don't know, 20, 30 different tools that they need to use to do their jobs. And I really think that when we ban cutting edge frontier technology tools from our most vulnerable students, we're putting them at a disadvantage for, where they're going to be going forward. Now, of course, they can be using it outside of school, but I think schools create a wonderful atmosphere to learn about the tools and how they can be applied more deeply and with their peers, and a deeper understanding of the use of those tools. So, I'm just thinking, like, when we hire new people in our portfolio companies, we're asking them to do performance tasks. And to do that, they have to leverage all of these different technology tools to do that. And, I know that like the more affluent kids are getting more sort of cycles with some of these products. And so that's where my mind goes when we think about equity in tools. I mean, I just think about how, you think it's like the fact that we've banned Zoom in some areas, and maybe those kids didn't have access to Zoom at home, and school was the only place that they were going to get it. And so that, just doesn't feel equitable to me. But
Well, Jennifer, before we wrap up, tell me if this sounds directionally accurate. You and I have talked about, for the audience, thinking about the essential questions. What kind of learning are you really striving for that's aligned with your school's mission, and how can AI support that? What are the policies to create
Yeah.
guardrails that allow for safe experimentation and usage? And finally, how do you keep equity at the forefront of these conversations to ensure that you don't leave anybody in your community behind, and that
Yeah.
hopefully we're all working towards a more equitable world? Those sound like maybe the takeaways for today.
Yeah. And Christian, sorry, one other thing that I think is that is important here too, is that like we put a lot on teachers to expect them to stay on top of all this stuff and to know what's going on. And it takes a ton of time to just practice with these tools, understand what's going on. And I feel that maybe a job of the administrators is to somehow, teachers have so much on their plate, to give them the time and the tools so that they can understand these tools and play around with them and get comfortable with using these tools, instead of, just piling yet another thing on their plates, like, oh, hey, now you got to understand AI and chat GPT. And it's like, okay, they're already overloaded, and when are they going to find the time to do that? So that's something that I
agree.
think is super important. But Christian, I can share the deck. It's mainly just screenshots and images, so it's not a lot of kind of in there, but I can share any other, tools that you think that, or articles that we discussed, or things that we've talked about too.
That's awesome. Jennifer, thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom today. And you've really done a great service to the many people who were on and who will watch the recording of this. And to our audience, thank you for participating. You're helping to strengthen the Middle States Network, and that influences over 2 million students around the world, which I'm really proud of. And finally, I want to encourage everybody to sign up for our next interview and Q&A with author Annie Murphy Paul, who is the author of, most recently, The Extended Mind, single-handed best thing I've read on the science of learning in the last several years. She's going to join us on February 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I hope you can join us for that. And Jennifer, again, thank you so much.